We welcome you with us here today. We'll be doing these webinars every couple of weeks, the aim being to contribute to the knowledge space, where knowledge is power, we believe, and education is key. For today's session, we have our guest star who is Mr. Ian Ross. Welcome to the session.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Ian. We're very lucky to have Mr. Ross with us here today, with over 30 years of experience in corporate fraud and investigations therewith. The idea of these sessions, ladies and gentlemen, is for us to pick on certain hot topics that we feel do not receive enough coverage. And as we were chatting some days ago, Ian and I, we came across the topic of corporate fraud, and this certainly we felt is deserving of more attention. I studied law many years ago, and we covered fraud. It was one of the institutes, still is, in the criminal code, a lot of provisions, but it was never really tied up for us, and especially not to the corporate sphere, which is so very relevant and which so many of us find ourselves in today. So what we'll be doing today is, with Mr. Ross's expert help, is presenting a set of core skills, a denominator, if we may, that can then be tailored in a structured manner to various applications, so to various fields. Whatever field you're in, the application can be made. And with that, I pass the mic on to Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Marilyn. Hi, everyone. Hope you're fine wherever you are. My name is Ian. I'm very pleased to meet you. I don't know what time it is where you are, but I wish you well. And I hope you find our get together here to be informative. And my intention is, more than anything, is that you have something to take away from here today, certainly. So thank you to PKF for this excellent opportunity for us both. First, a very little polite notice. I'm not going to read it out. I think it's quite clear, and I think it's fair play. Moving swiftly on. This is what we're about today. What we're going to be doing basically is getting into areas more than sort of invisible or grey areas, which are rarely addressed properly with any depth or accuracy in internal fraud problems and issues. Capability is a word that you see on the top line. This is going to crop up quite a lot during our time together here. The capability to commit fraud and the thinking and the doing that goes with it. The red flags, of course, it's very traditional, it's well known, but there are times, again, we'll make clear, is that sometimes in fraud, corruption, whichever sophisticated situations, sometimes there are no mistakes to follow. We need to follow the skill. So aside from technical solutions that read suspicious transactions, things which are set, rules-based, we are providing a more skills-based approach today. And with this also, we're going to look at specialist personnels who will pose threats, who've got the means and capability, this word again already. But combine this with the next point, which is about the key psychologies. At the end of it all, everyone, I think we know that fraud remains a human crime, and that criminals will leverage technology some of the times to exploit human fallibility. And with this, what comes into the pot is the personality and styles of certain fraudster criminals who are in management, who are in place in any situation and with their own particular styles. We'll look at how spotting collusion, if it's more than one player, for example. And then we're getting into the investigation part of this element, avoiding the classic pitfalls. And then we're going to round it off with some good points concerning processes and management. Just to not to show about me as such, but I think it's some of these tools that you're going to see, and the reason I've just put this short bio information here is that over the years, some of the tools that you're going to see introduced in here have been developed by some of the works that we've done in different situations. I'm talking maybe the first and third, and certainly the fourth and fifth lines of this. Some of the it matters not about the level or the gravity of the case. The core skills and behaviors remain the same. So Experience has informed what we're going to be doing today, not just me, what I've done, but also about the people that I've worked with and people who have assisted me also. So I hope we can bring this together for you. Okay, so here we are. The approach will be from the left side upwards is the awareness. These steps, as you can see, are going to be taken proportionately. The awareness point is going to be reasonably brief. I'm not here to tell you what you know already. I'm just forming a baseline to work with, and we will be working into the detection. We're bridging the gap between the awareness and the investigation into this area. When do we start? Where do we stop? What is suspicion? Then we're going to get into investigation, and then finally, as I say, to crown it with some prevention skills and methods. Okay, just some cold realities, everyone. Please engage with this. And there is obviously lots of research with lots of statistics, but it's true to say overall in any situation of crime risk is insider attacks should be a concern for you because they have more attacks outside most of the time. And the costs, again, we could go into all kinds of figures, but they do cost absolute fortunes. And there are some very good reports around that you're probably aware of about the costs of fraud and corruption. More to the point on the kind of personal way of things, insiders are familiar a lot of the time. You will see in a moment, I'm going to put a slide on which will make the point even more clear, that fraudsters know what they're doing most of the time. They know very well where information on the goodies, if you like, is located. They know the law. They know the audit plans. They know a lot of things. This is not being critical of companies, but it's a lot of the, we have to be ready to plug these gaps and how we can detect things quicker than we are doing. And the issues associated will be the focus of what we're talking. So one quick snapshot for you. This is from last year. This is only what the ACFE call occupational fraud. This doesn't count money laundering. It doesn't count anything else. This is purely to do with insider occupational fraud activity across an ACFE canvassed survey. $3.5 trillion just with occupational fraud. And it's probably more. This is a round figure. So let's keep real with this and let's just be honest with ourselves about the levels of this and what's being done about it. And again, I'm not going to read through these. You can see what the impact is. It doesn't need me to read out these, what fraud does to people. Fraud kills in many ways. It is as simple as that. It sounds a bit graphic, forgive me, saying it like this, but it is. You can see from this cycle of problems that can do to you. So a quick question for you just for a few seconds to ponder on with that in mind. In my view, certainly, and many others, why is fraud unique as a crime? Now, just for a moment or two, you might want to reflect or consider why this is. And trust me, fraud is unique as a crime. I'll just pause for a second. Fraud is unique as a crime. Is it too sweeping or is it true? I think it's very true. First of all, there is no scene of crime with this like other crimes. And also, there are lots of other things as well that go with it. It demands every single aspect of investigatory skill possible. Fraud also connects with so many business issues, commercial issues, social issues that we don't even think about. But I think the most important point of this question is that to be a victim of fraud is to be made a fool of. If somebody steals from you, if somebody assaults you or something like it, commits crime, it's pretty straightforward that you'll go get them arrested or something and get them dealt with by the courts or whichever criminal means. But fraud isn't quite like this. Many people don't like to be seen to be made fools of. and at company levels, reputations, they are very reticent to report fraud, that they've been turned over by fraudsters. And a lot of people also don't like to admit they've had someone turn up at the door and scam them out of money, or gone online or something and con them. This is, there is a certain set of unique principles of why this is so. So just food for thought more than anything. With this in mind, some of these comments that I've heard over the years and what I've seen over the years, I find mildly irritating in some ways. I find them very unhelpful, honestly. I keep hearing that fraud is so complex and complicated and all this. Well, it isn't. Don't misunderstand me here to say that we're oversimplifying the issue. Fraud is not complicated. It's only complicated for those who choose to make it so. And I really mean this honestly. Let's not go into this area where we're just overcomplicating, overthinking. And I trust that some of the points I'm going to show to you here will verify this. Next one, fraudsters are criminals. It's just nonsense. It really is. And when we look at our next points, you'll see why. We give opportunity, people take it. Last week's great upstanding member of the community, fine professional person, unblemished work history, comes into your company and it's open door. Fraudsters are always looking over their shoulders. This is, again, for me, total nonsense. And as again, when we get into management styles and attitudes, you will see that they are not looking over their shoulders. They're looking straight at you. Follow the money. Well, this is to a point with money laundering, fine to a point, but some of it, as you'll see, it just simply doesn't happen like this all the time. So some of these colloquialisms are dated and not really helpful, just in my view. I'm not going to stop on this. This is just to reassure you of all the huge number of definitions of fraud, the legal across the world, in my experience, all the different legal definitions of fraud, and they vary wildly, trust me, in different jurisdictions. The corporate frauds definitions, they make up their own with their policies and compliance. Fine, this is great. They give examples of it. They write their manuals. They write their practices. They make up their own definitions as well. Some of them good, some of them a bit not quite so good. Financial, meaning accountancy definitions. Certain companies will implant financial parameters within their definitions of fraud. Academic, there is a bewildering number of academic definitions of fraud. So many authors. And the social, as we see everyday things like scam, hoodwink, all these kind of street or social names for them. But let me take away all the complexity and let's use this one. If you haven't seen this one before, this is something that myself and a great colleague of mine came up with. And when you boil it all down from all those range of definitions in legal and financial, look at this. It's straightforward. It's to create in the mind, this word, ingredient word, intention, false perceptions in the mind of. Following this, you can apply this. You can never have such a thing. Fraud can never be accidental. When you hear things like, oh yeah, the rules are not clear, or yes, I had no choice. Well, that's rationalization. Anything like it, mistakes and errors, what the politicians say most of the time. We heard this a lot during the UK politicians' expenses scandals, and these excuses were used commonly about the rules are not clear, etc. It's your role, getting between the lines for a moment, it is your role to overcome these excuses, which I'll show you how you can do as we get through here. What you have to prove is first of all, the misrepresentation, that it's been conveyed in one way or another to the victims, even if they don't know who the victims are. For example, with phishing emails, with utterances, withholding, falsifications, forgeries, anything at all. If it's conveyed, then this is the next part of it. Then the victim will rely upon this and believing it to be true, and gives up something they wouldn't have done had they known the truth. So straightforward clinical definitions, core concepts. We're getting away, honestly, ladies and gentlemen, from the well-trodden ground about types of fraud and categorizations, tick boxes, and we're getting into this part now where we can use these core concepts and we can apply them. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and let this kind of sink in, just to show you the misrepresentation, the doing, and the reliance, and that's it done with. You can then go back to your policies, to your compliance, you can go to your organizations and then start working from these benchmarks and start developing them with your own examples and situations of prevention and how you would formulate an investigation, for example. So what we also have to do is understand where criminal actors will get into your business beyond things like KYC and around the corner, these kind of things. Briefly, quickly, the overlapping is inevitable with certain crimes, with corporate economic crimes, with fraud, they will often lap together. Corruption, the bribes, the most common examples, conflicts of interest. And the psychology of the bribe is very simple. You do for me, I do for you. There's no mystery about how it works. And as far as corruption and bribes are concerned, I would say to you, please do not get over, for want of a better word, fixated on the gifts. So if someone offers you I don't know, a bunch of flowers, or they send you a nice gift of some kind, there's a lot of confusion about, can I accept it? Shall I not accept it? What do we do with this? You record it in your register, I'm sure. What do we do with it? The main thing is to look behind the bribe, if you like, and decide what is the intention of giving this bunch of flowers. If you get to the intention, instead of being too concerned or hung up on the item itself, if you get to the intention, you'll have a clear case of somebody who's trying to pull one over you or trying to get a contract by corrupt means. Look at the intention, not the materiality or value of the gift. And certainly with money laundering in your corporate fraud setup, yeah, simple points. Criminal disguises the nature of the property or moves the money. It's either one or the other, or both of these in money laundering. Money can stay in the same place for 5 years and never move and still be laundered. So the follow the money thing doesn't always sort of work in that particular way. It always has some nuance, and money laundering isn't always about buying properties in London or whatever it is. In corporate fraud scenarios internally, money laundering tends to kind of, pardon the pun, seep into a scenario. I'm going to show you an example of it now. It tends to come in as a naturally occurring financial crime on the back of corruption and fraud. Once it starts moving around, it's laundered, or it stays in place and gets disguised from the auditors or from whoever it is. It's laundered.
Ian,
Yes.
Ian, I wonder if I could interrupt you, because we have some questions coming in. Maybe we could get your comments on them and add a little bit of color to the discussion. So one listener is asking on the topic of bribes.
Yes.
Is bribes and cutting corners the same thing? So potentially he's targeting, I don't know, it's a rationalization to my mind immediately, again, what you said earlier. But what are your thoughts on it? Is bribes and cutting corners the same thing?
Not always, but sometimes it can be, without sounding too vague. I hope as we get into this a bit further, there are a couple of slides which I think will pinpoint on this answer. But for now, I would say to you that it depends, again, if the line is crossed from shady or unethical behavior into a definition of bribes. Has the corner cutting? Yes, it's unethical. Yes, it's horrible behavior. It's unprofessional. It's all of those things. But what you would have to decide professionally is, has the line been crossed into corruption from this area? There are all kinds of unethical behaviors going on all the time in business. But if we arrested everyone for corruption, the jails would be full. So I hope I've answered your question to the delegate is, It depends when the line is crossed. You have to decide against your own policy, is this dodgy? Has someone gone too far? And I will revisit this point and complete it when I get to another couple of slides a little further along.
Thank you, Ian. And we have one more question that just came in, which
Yes.
is focused on the money laundering aspects, which you just touched upon. And the question goes, in your view, how important is the role of the money laundering reporting officer in terms of preventing fraud in a company?
Well, the answer to that is absolutely crucial. The MLRO is an absolute linchpin, front line, if you will, in spotting money laundering. Awareness is one thing. And I think also it depends again, more to the point, is the role, the particular money laundering officer, reporting officer, in a particular organization, because the MLRO will have a different function from one company industry to another. And also, I think it's fair to say that some of the technologies and resources that these officers use, I think they have to be absolutely on the ball. And then getting to the point of that question is they have to be absolutely on point with razor sharp awareness of money laundering. And again, I would say to our colleague, thank you for your question, because when we get into the next section of here, I will really polish this answers off with about suspicion, how and when to act on suspicion, when the line has been crossed. This is all about perception of knowing and knowing when to act, knowing what you're seeing. If it's money laundering or whether it's bribes with corner cutting, we need to make some distinctions. And I trust I'm going to show you how to do that in a little.
Thank you very much, Ian. We look forward to that.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Insider threat. Well, okay, we could get lists here, but by and large, a kind of a collective assortment of insider threat. Employees. This will include senior people. Okay. Contractors, consultants who come in, come out. Other business affiliates who have the business or professional capability. This word again, I did promise you it will be used more than one time, and here we are. They have the capability to exploit internal policies, misuse the network, or violate policy. The ones, as you can see, will actually be the ones who will push the boat as far as possible and will try and try and try without getting caught, keeping under the threshold, which is like our colleague's question about cutting the corners or just getting too far so you'll not get caught. You see, the typical fake invoice is fine. I mean, they don't have red flags on, everyone. I put these on. Unfortunately, they don't come with red flags on already. But anyway, this is very classic, very simple example of a fake invoice. You can look at a couple of the red flags. I'm using the term without myself. Looking at the right-hand corner is, well, if it's an experienced or established company, why only 4 invoices? And then on the right column, where's the taxation? VAT completely missing. So you're looking for things that are not there, as well as things that are not, which are there. Discrepancies with the ABN is some kind of digit short. And in the middle, the blatant one in please pay immediately in handwriting, subtle, which completely contradicts with the bottom line that says paying in 30 days. So straightforward, just to show again, but more specifically and technically, or whichever way, professionally, if you want to say this, our accountants, our numbers people who can bamboozle the auditors, they can mess around with figures, very, very good at what they do. This kind of fraudster in-house, or who's got the buying power in the company? How's it being done? With this one, this would raise issues of collusion with banks and others to process things, all the rest of it, which we'll get into again as we get into more of this. And then, yeah, who's forging signatures? How much is happening of this? Who's doing it? What's the thrust of the business? Yeah, cutting corners. Great question it was as well. Is this, it depends on the actions that follow from it. if it's cutting corners, oh, I'm going to save myself a trip to a client. I'm just going to blag his signature on this form. Yeah, and then the customer's going to be okay with this. No problem. We go back years. So corner cutting is one thing, but if this leads to something more significant, then you have fraud, certainly. And our favorite topic at this moment, the IT, the cyber fraud in-house. But showing those basic examples is fine, but you need to be asking yourself this. We're getting into between the lines. Is it a single hit? Is it enough? Is it a big fraud or bribe or whatever? Is it big enough to retire off? Or is it a pattern, start, middle, or end of a pattern of fraud? You need to be asking these questions. We can show examples of fake invoices and things all the time. And how much? When you quantify how much is the business losing, are you hemorrhaging money? How quick do we need to respond? I'll show you how. How often is this happening? You need to be getting the answers to these questions. And this word again, who has the capability? Okay, malicious insiders, you can see a typical typecast, if you will, of malicious, as we call them, posing the threat, the biggest one, the disgruntled employees. Fine. But the next point, profit seeker, is in absolute stark contrast to this. The profit seeker, the ethically challenged, if you will, someone who wants to cut corners and gets carried away and wants to show off how clever they are. And they eventually, it's only a matter of time before they do cross the line, I have to say. And another typecast is one who's about to leave, being given notice. So I've encountered these situations, and when I interviewed one particular chap who'd done this, he said, well, I'm just going to make sure I get mine before I go. These are the kind of things that you'll see. So it's a short list with wide meanings, in honesty, but the concepts are the same. So here, again, don't think I'm discriminating. Any IT colleagues on here listening today, this is just purely factual and everything else. The high levels of expertise, absolutely so, and respect for this. It doesn't mean that we're smearing the whole IT department. We're simply saying that people, the odd bad apple or collusions, some of the biggest bank heists, ATM heists, I can remember very well in the Sultanate of Oman, 2014, when so many ATM machines were hit on the same day because of IT collusion. A couple of people inside the bank were colluding with a gang who were cloning credit cards, and millions of reals went in one single day. So it happens. You're going to get an odd one. A group that require close monitoring, well, maybe that's a bit harshly worded, but I think it's true to say that when you're delegating people to investigate potential fraud involving IT or IT skills, as we'll say, then you need to have the competent people. It's as simple as that. Okay, let me give you an example here of combining the IT with human skill. There is a fraud activity. Both of these examples I found are very common in, for example, healthcare, insurance, health fraud, medical issues. The levels of this, the volumes are absolutely enormous. When I first got involved with this, I was absolutely astounded at some of the methods used in medicals. Doctors, consultants, I'm talking internally, entire clinical practices billing for non-existent diseases, all kinds of stuff. But on the technical side, we have this practice called upcoding. This is like rounding up all the time. What the rule benders, if you like, somebody's mentioned it now. Yeah, upcoding means that you simply round it up to the next most expensive code possible on an item. If it's IT and it's processed by an automated accountancy mechanism, people will upcode to the next highest thing that no one can really check immediately. They'll just wave it through most of the time. They do get upcoded. Upcoded is a problem. It's like overcharging, but in a more subtle IT way with the human skill knowledge behind it. Unbundling is, again, particularly where give you an example. If you went to the hospital and you had some treatments, and then the doctors or whoever would bill the health service or the government, they would unbundle all the treatments and charge them separately and overprice them. So by the time you've got one treatment paid for, by the time you get to the end of the line, the value and price of the treatment has been increased by maybe 5-6 times from the original. This is, again, and the big health services are being automated as they are. Again, this is something that the people should be aware of how they're going to stop this, because millions and millions get leaked and hemorrhaged, pardon the expression, through this. Okay. So what we're doing here is getting into our skill side of it. Is when you look at this line down the middle, on the left side is the process, our compliance, our legal people, fine. And on the right side is the skill issue. This is a simple, for me, it's just a simple little way of getting across what we need to do here. For example, if you're all process, forgive me if it sounds a bit sort of blunt here. If you're all process, you know, you can recite and you can remember your compliance manuals, you know the law very well, fine. But if you can't do any on the right side, you're not going to be much good at investigating. But if you're all on the right side and none of the left side, this is where we lose the plot, if you like. We start corner cutting, we start showing off, we start getting into this dangerous territory of rule bending in investigations if you're not anchoring yourself to compliance. So my little quick way of saying here is never have both feet on one side of this line at the same time. Keep one foot on that line all the time. Have one foot in the left or the right. Know your compliance, have it in your pocket, and bring your skills in, and you'll remain ethical straight down the line. Keep one foot on this line. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just as a kind of snapshot for each. Asset misappropriation is enormous. The inside, like an example I've given you with the medical. Fraud statements, like I've shown you. Corruption on the right block, if you will, brings in what we've said already. Bribes, corruption. Do not get fixated and worried about gifts, facilitations. Cut right through this and get to the intentions of sending it. Then you'll have a case much clearer to deal with it. You can make a decision then whether to cut off the contractor, disbar them from your list, or you can make it more serious and take actions, or you can even go to the authorities if it's serious enough. It depends on the gravity of the case. So, example here, corruption, conflicts of interest, as you've seen, accounting, procurement is a very important issue. Again, this is enormous in global fraud, procurement. So the trade, the supply, the bids, the tenders, the amount of corruption that goes on is beggars belief. Someone bribes someone to give a multi-million-pound contract, and then to maintain it later, arranges all kinds of kickbacks, fraudulent payment processes, just to keep the wheels in motion. So, for example, you can see the procurement there. It should really be called procurement corruption, as opposed to procurement fraud. You can see the corruption in procurement is the biggest item. Fraud tends to be the wheels in the cog, the fake invoices, the agreements, the sweeteners. It keeps things moving. Fake invoices, these slipping through occasional fake invoices amongst a whole bundle of financial statements. Money laundering will inevitably come into it. These are just a couple of examples for you. So with this part, we're not repeating ourselves. I'm just showing you now because we're in the middle, in the mind of the fraudster internally. I'm sure that all of you have seen this before, the famous fraud triangle. Donald Cressy brought this in the 1940s, and I still say that you use it, but use it with modern issues with it. I'll give you examples. Starting with pressure on the left side, be honest with yourself. you know, if you're in senior management or whatever it is, does your company impose horrible sales targets, for example, on your employees? It's like pushing down on a water balloon or something. If you keep pressing down on it, something will give. And our colleague, thank you, whoever you are raising the question, this always starts mis-selling in the banks. It started of mis-selling, then it got worse, then it got worse, then it got worse, then it became full-on fraud in certain places like Wells Fargo. But in the UK banks, this was happening all the time. Opportunity, I said before about this quite unwise comments about people looking over their shoulders and all this kind of thing. A lot of corporate fraudsters are first-time offenders. You know, last week they had no convictions, they had no inclinations to commit fraud, but suddenly we've left the door open to them. It's open house, and they will see it. You know, they're not stupid people. They will see opportunity and they will take it. If your controls are so bad, if they see that you don't delegate properly with your investigations and things like it, they will know about this. But on the right side, rationalization, the self-justification. Now, I'm going to show you some examples here. Now, these are ones that I have personally recorded and heard, if you like, from fraud offenders during the times of investigations. You've got to be ready for some of these because, like, in the mind of it, it's everyone is their own person, if you like. Some of them are quite humorous. This was one I heard, and they genuinely believe what they're saying. Yeah, a sense of loyalty, committing fraud. Yeah. And now this is slightly pompous, isn't it? Okay. This is the one you've got to be ready for later when we get to this. There is nothing worse if someone comes out with this excuse, if you like. You're accusing someone of fraud, investigating them, but you've never told them, you've never given them any awareness, you've never given them training, even if you have never told them in proper, clear language what fraud actually is. This is why we did our little definition, if you like, at the beginning. If you're able to explain it to people, they can't deny that they knew it was a crime. But a lot of people don't, and they fall over here, and the fraudster gets away with it. Again, very pompous, retaliation type response. And now, noble cause corruption. This is my favorite one coming up for the last one. This is when I used to investigate quite a lot of insurance fraud at one time. Yes, enough said. And he was laughing when he said it, and I started laughing as well, to be honest. Anyway, detection. Okay, so here we are. Let's bridge this gap. And I come back to this question from our colleague. Thank you. It was a great question. We need to fill in the gap here. This is now where I promised I would develop the answer to it. Detection is to identify. So they start with you, the challenges. We need to get over our own personal biases, our own ways that cause problems for ourselves, honestly. And I've been there in my modest time for the police service. I've made mistakes. You know, I'm not coming here today with a perfect, I've made mistakes like many, many others. But I hope there's something learning from these is useful for you. The main pitfalls, we start getting fixated on confessions. We want a confession, hard proof, if you like. It really is galling that people keep driving and driving and driving till they get this hard proof. Meetings instead of interviews. We're having a meeting about this delicate matter. Get to the point and have a proper trained fact-checking interview. Obviously, we run entire courses on that skill alone. The here and now judgment, rushing to judgment straight away. It's either this or it's this. Nonsense. We need to be going through this in a very thorough manner. And then this is all about detecting lies and deceit. Again, it's not quite so It falls short. Just because someone is telling lies does not mean they are committing fraud. You need to make those differences. And again, has somebody cut the corner or have they crossed the line? You need to establish this clearly and easily, and you will do. Avoid bullying people in these situations. It gets you absolutely nowhere, only trouble. So the dilemma is knowing where to start. And it ties in with this question we had. This is an absolute, it seems terribly obvious, but it's absolutely classic. Knowing where to start, knowing when to stop. I've just mentioned now we push and push and push for confessions and irrefutable proof and all this kind of things. But the problems you've got are dilemmas. A lot of people have got very limited subject matter or product knowledge. If I was to ask you, say, go and deal with this upcoding and unbundling, you probably look at me in a very strange manner. You need to know, you have to know, it is unforgivable, or better put, it's just a non-starter when you want to investigate or stop fraud when you don't even know what it is. Lack of training, or your own project, lack of training. Again, the training comes in all kinds of levels and ways, but the training has to be quality training. There's no half cuts with this. False economy on doing short, forgive me as an example only, sort of e-learning courses in 10 minutes is something, it's just pointless. Having exclusionary investigation policies. This, I think, is more geared towards or to enforcement, law enforcement, the police. They have very, very policy dominant ways of approaching fraud in its investigation. They have separate policies, which I personally find are quite exclusionary in some ways. It's not quite the same in the corporate way, but nonetheless, the policy has to be absolutely sound and clear, so you're not shooting yourself in the foot. So this, I think, will answer our colleagues' question, both of them, to be honest, beyond the red flags. Suspicion, the MLRO issue, how do I know I'm suspicious? Is it because the computer tells me, or is it because of my skill? Or in other situations of fraud, why am I the auditor? Suspicious, skeptical, why is this? In this filter of information, we get information at the top and we filter it out at the bottom. We need to know how we get to the moment when a decision on suspicion has to be made in terms of, is it going to go into a full investigation or does it end here? So, for example, your suspicion levels here. So the policy metrics on the first line, that's just vertical line that's just appeared, is how far has it gone? How far am I suspicious? What kind of policy? What will policy tell me to do? When do I act? What kind of standard of proof do I have to have? Does it have to be this far? Or does it have to be this much? Where you've got to decide on these kind of metrics is when and how you will act on suspicion only. Do I make a report? Yes, please do. It's not accusing, but if you actually put it in a professional, ethical manner, there's no harm done at all. Don't report absolutely everything, rule-based systems and false positives and all this kind of thing. Be perceptive with your suspicion. Report it if you think it needs to be reported, and gauge how far your suspicion takes you and put it in. Examples here quickly. Skimming, as you've probably heard of, is an area of fraud. People skimming off the top, very commonly committed when money's coming into an organization and somebody decides to help themselves to 10% of each invoice and alter the invoices, skimming off the top. Again, this is mostly picked up on by audit, but it's not done immediately. You have to have a cyclic process in place. Lapping is mostly done by employees who still, and they do in places, handle cash and checks at the same time. They normally have very good relationships, long-standing relationships with customers. So people have got no problem with trust just sending in checks, and they will go into some kind of little intricate scheme of converting the cash and keeping part of it themselves. Okay, so at this particular point, we are a useful tool that I call the 3 C's: the conduct, circumstances, consequences. This will help you decide. This is purely a screening device. It's not a magic wand or anything, but it's a very useful. I've used this in a couple of occasions, or many occasions. I wrote it. So the conduct, look at the conduct concerns. Get the case in front of you, whether it's come through whistleblower hotlines, a report, an email, whatever it is, however it's come to you. Pick it apart, look at the conduct. Don't look for people's names and defendants and hard evidence. Is the conduct, does it tell you if fraud has taken place? Look at the circumstances in which it has happened. Is it business to business? Is it procurement? Is it in-house? How, in what circumstances is this conduct happening? And look at the consequences of it. Has misrepresentation happened, and has gain being made from it? If you have a case to answer, and you need to start an investigation. So with our colleague's question, look at the conduct, corner cutting, circumstances, whatever you had in mind, and then you decide, this is a bit iffy, it's a bit dodgy, but it's not quite fraud, it's not quite crossed the line. So you decide it's a purely screening mechanism. This is not looking for people, or this is purely a mechanism that you can quickly use in about 30 seconds. So let me give you a quick example here. If your company has a recording of gifts, like I said, the hospitality and the sweeteners, if you want to call them, with bribes, let's use the word, and you had a policy where you've got to record every single gift that comes into the business, whether it's on your intranet line or whatever it is that you use, and you get rumors flying around the place that somebody has awarded a dodgy contract and taken bribes for it. Now, if I was running this as a full training course, I'd get you to spend maybe 5 minutes writing out your first steps in how you would investigate or respond to this scenario. Take a look at it. Now, many responses I've heard when I've used this example before is that, oh, let's go and interview all the procurement people. Let's check their expenses. Let's check their phone records. Let's go and do this. Let's go and do that. Now, I'm afraid this jumping in is one of the pitfalls when you're just going to destroy morale. You're going to start upsetting people. If you start lining people up for interrogation, if you're going to start going through their bank accounts, you're going to start doing this and this. My first response to this suspicion, it's only suspicion, just to come in with the 3 C's, is to, first of all, carry out a full review due diligence check of every single director of this company. Yes, conflict of interest, first of all. It's a start point only, not a magical answer. You go through to see if your non-executive director has got some conflict of interest that coincides with the awarding of a certain contract. Then you start going into it. You'll start moving into this crossing the line. Well, if so, what was the gift given and what was the intention behind it? You're starting to build on your suspicion and moving into this more concrete area of investigation. You're making inroads instead of guessing and instead of accusing by jumping all over procurement staff. First of all, clear your senior people first in a case like this. They set the tone, they set the policy, and they have to abide by it. But it's a clean and clinical viable means of respectful. And I've done this, and all the people concerned were very cooperative. If you go about it the right way, you'll be fine. Management styles, I'll be very quick, I'm mindful of the time. Heuristics, this is, you've heard before, this is about mental processes that people make to make judgments quickly and efficiently. Politicians do it all the time. Managers, we all do it all the time. We paraphrase things. But unfortunately, when it comes to fraud, people do the same thing. So for example, with your narcissism, it's all about me, it's all about look at me, look what I've done. And people don't look over their shoulders. They want to show and boast what they've done. They really do. Your narcissists, they don't mind being challenged. They love the challenge of being investigated, some of them. They don't hide away. So with these kind of people, what kind of conversational bully? You could get your coded person who talks in riddles, or you get your blocker and diverter. Examples. Yeah, somebody, you've probably met them. Yeah, they can't shut up. They shout, they bull, they bully. This is what they're like, and they won't hold back. Yeah, this is your evader. This is your heuristics person who overdoes it. Yeah, you've got to overcome these things, and you will do. And your blocker and your diverter, this fine gentleman is called Martin Shkreli, and he is now in prison, but not for the original fraud. He was in the pharmaceutical industry and decided to increase pharmaceutical products by something like 2,000%, just absolutely ripping everyone off. And this was his actual response. I've not made this up. He was interviewed on the TV, and this is exactly what he said. So people have got their flamboyance, they're not shy, they want to dare you, they want to challenge you. So these are the other ones. I'm not going to go through all these. You can see other kinds of employee triggers in the workplace that make people do what they do sometimes. So people will respond by fraud. They will respond in many ways, obviously, but they will respond by fraud and corruption. And these are the kind of symptoms psychology speaking will show you how people will behave. The investigation side of it, again, a simple clinical definition on the top line there. It's all about combining the knowing and the doing. It's as simple as that. The state of the mind with the actual act that goes with it. Combine these and you have a crime. And this is how you will investigate it. What we're looking at for all crimes on the left in knowledge detail, you can see identities and locations, all these kind of plans like audit plans all along there. They all exist. We extract the evidence from whatever happens in the case. On the right side, what we call time and event detail that dovetails into the knowledge actions. What happened last week, Tuesday, Wednesday? Who said what to who? So it's more than just showing associations and drawing maps and graphs and things. You're filling in the events here. Any reactions to what was said or what was done? Who responded quickly after an audit and things were found missing? Who responded first? And how did they respond? It gives you a red flag, if you will, of people's reactions, trying to cover their tracks and what was said in certain situations. So you can do this, don't let it wash over you, do a kind of mind map, very good skill to use. I use these all the time after I've screened them with the 3 C's. Get the facts, get it in front of you. Don't try to prioritize everything at once and do everything at first, because you won't do it. Nature won't allow it, if you like. You will not get it clear in front of you in a mind map fashion, and you will not miss anything. Then you start with a second one, then you start to prioritize the topics. How did it start? Who's involved? Which is a leading topic here? What triggered the whole thing, topic 1? And then is a topic 2, the real guts of the thing, interactions, who moved the money, who actually signed this off, who did this, who did that. So these are the kinds of evidence that you'll have, which are absolutely crucial. You'll see the types of evidence in here. Documents, word histories, emails, all of this will come into it in some form. Some will form more weight than others, some will appear, some won't appear at all. You have to be aware of the kinds of evidence that you're going to deal with. How does it arrive with us? Witness testimony is as crucial because it actually forms the glue, if you like. It bonds together all the physical evidence. So witness testimony, you've got to capture and get very carefully and test it. So with this, the capability list, as I call it, in internal fraud, brief profiling. I'm not talking about here about literacy levels so much. I'm not talking about educational, who's got a PhD, who's got a master's, who's got a doctorate, whatever. It's talking about literacy levels. Is the person capable of committing this fraud? You've got to make these inroads. This especially is useful, as I've found, when someone is, you don't know who it is, basically. The level of experience, of rank or position, what would they need to commit this particular fraud? Creating inroads into it, and establish that your thief is being selective and why this is. It's all about capability. And you can use this little tool. This is courtesy of my great friend and colleague, Professor Eric Shepherd, the SC3R timeline. Instead of doing rambling notes one after another, you could have this in your file and your kit, do an event line, put some notes in the knowledge bins at the bottom, when things happen, who's done what, when you added things on, who's got involved, when did the witness appear, when did the whistleblower appear, put them in there. This one here is just a quick example of a fraud dominant scenario in-house. Nice little involved thing with, for those of you involved in finance, you could apply your skills here. Look at the 3 C's. Don't let it rush all over you. Look at the conduct. Representation leaping at you straight away. Crowdfunding is in the circumstances of it. It's business, investors, crowdfunding. Simple little bullet points, one after another, will give you little trips and stepways into the case. By the time of it, you've established a clear case to answer for misappropriation of funding for the Bitcoin store. This is how you go into it. This is how then you put your mind map out, get it in front of you. Get those nice large blobs, if you will, in front of you, then you can probe them in priority and then present your case. There's a last one there. I'm just mindful of timing, so I'm just going to round off here. There's quite a nice involved case, someone in a law firm, I think it was. Just rattle through that there. I'm not going to read through all of it. It's straightforward. Bit of unbundling going on there, as you can see. I beg your pardon, upcoding. Approve those invoices and forward them in batches. Straightforward, classic batch-driven fraud with invoicing processes. No problem at all. And if it goes unchecked, though, long enough, the volume will increase and increase and increase. They will do things by volume and frequency. They will actually use frequency to amass volume and monies. So you have to decide at the end of that, and back to our question again, as we had, who has crossed the line as this defendant from the bottom? Not done quite enough. Does the rule bending not quite constitute its bad, horrible behavior and needs to be disciplined or told off or whatever it is? But as a person crossed the line, but just, we're on a borderline case here. Shall we just do a warning? Shall we give training? Shall we just give the benefit of the doubt, given we haven't told him, her, what fraud actually is? Or along the top line, is this person up to their necks in it? No problem at all. You've got an absolute case. You've gone through all of it. You've fact checked it. You've put it together. Then you do your report based on these items. So have they crossed the line a bit or completely? You decide on when you measure your evidence. So there you go. Interview, okay, will be the final action. Is it a crime? You go to law, you go to policy. You go up there. If it's no, then it ends here. That's it. It's a horrible person. You don't like the attitude and they are cocky or whatever it is. But if it is a case to answer, you then start a full investigation, resourcing. Don't go running to your experts straight away, your forensic accountants and all the rest of it. Reason it out, and then you can use people at a proportionate and sensible time when needed, if needed. Finally, our part here. When we got onto the management side of this, once you've gone through all this, you can have a confidence of knowing very well that management in the organization works well. Pseudostability, what this means is, it's a term that's been around for a while, but not very well known. It means is, don't be complacent, basically. If all is quiet and not much fraud is being reported, it doesn't mean that fraud is not happening. Don't be complacent. Oh yes, we have ISO. Oh yes, we have policies. Oh yes, we have an audit. We don't have a problem here. Well, you may have, and you need to be checking on it. That's the management approach. So prevention is use these wisely, target the objectives of management, identify these problem points. What underpinning crimes go with the fraud? Is it corruption, which it mostly is, or is it theft of assets? What's the problems commonly? And then you can crown with all these, your compliance processes, write them up astutely, get the right people working on them, not just delegating to someone who goes into tick box territory. Risk assessment framework, make sure it's absolutely solid when it comes to fraud. And the KYC, you'll know if you're working in finance. And the trends, look at these, keep up with them, and they'll help you to progress your prevention and maintain excellent fraud prevention policy. So that's you, there's a thing. You're there, it goes round in a circle. You need to break the circle sometimes, and you need to stop pseudostability. You need to have good practices with investigation. Deal with suspicion. Don't the gray area, deal with it strongly, measure it and apply it. Finally, I said this already, expect employees, never expect them to understand what fraud is without telling them. They'll have the best excuse in the world. People have different views, like a great question. Yeah. Has the line been crossed? Oh, this is okay. No harm done here. I can do this. I can forge a signature now and again, or whatever it is. Adopt generic control. They vary. If you work in a large organization, they will vary, particularly if it's in international offices. Generic training is fine, keep it core, but then do go into differing emphasis of training when you can. Never ignore red flags or suspicions, and don't please introduce an anti-fraud policy but never follow up on it. It's pointless having it. And as I just said, pseudo-stability, it's your biggest enemy in fraud management. So there we go.
Thank you, Ian. That was extremely insightful, and I'm convinced our listeners felt so too. I just wish to get your thoughts on one or two questions that came in the meantime before we wrap it up.
Yes,
Is that
please.
okay?
Of course,
Brilliant.
yes.
So one listener touched upon the employee scenario where there's a case of redundancy. You focus a little bit on the risks posed by employees. And the question goes, in the case of a redundancy, would you deem it fit to cut that employee of any contact of sensitive data and information, or might that tend towards a lack of trust shown by the employer? In a case where the employee has not shown any risk of fraud as yet, is my understanding of the question.
Well, thank you to our colleague who brought this question. It's a very good question, I have to say. And I think the answer to this is, again, depends on the levels, if on the kind of organization that you're working in. If you're working in an organization that has tier levels of security clearances and things like it, then the first point will be you should, because if this person has access to the most sensitive areas of the business or the organization, then you have to take safeguards, clinical safeguards, and kind of phase the person out in a proper, friendly way. You know, if I can put it like this, it would depend on the levels. In all honesty, on the second one, if you worked in a kind of an organization that didn't have this but had confidential information, I'm just trying to think of an example if I can help the colleague. If you kind of say, if you worked in an airline, I can think of an example of British Airways of people some years ago were going around leaking out and selling customer data when they were leaving. Again, horizontally, if you like speaking, then you will need, if you have some suspicion that the person, or inclination, if you like, or indication, I mean, that someone is going to do something wrong of that nature, you need to act and stop it. It's as simple as that. If you've got, if you had suspicion, or someone showed their intentions that they were going to do something like it, then stop. Yeah, absolutely stop any accesses and everything else. it has to be done. And secondly, on the level thing, you would need to do it as a matter of policy, I think. I hope that answers your question.
Very, very exhaustive. Thank you, Ian. Just one last one quickly, because it was a good question. The listener commented, there is a lot of psychology behind this analysis that goes into such an investigative scenario. And in your experience as a person who has led so many investigations, how much weighting or how much importance would you give to the non-verbals, presumably in the case of an interview? And myself, I'd like to add on a little part to that. And how often has it checked out?
Well, I think it's important to understand that, as I said before, it is important, is the first point of the answer. Of course, it's important. But having said that, remember, it would be a mistake to completely rely upon body language if you're in an interview scenario or whichever, or some kind of discussion scenario with somebody suspected. The person could be genuinely scared, nervous, have a medical condition if they keep looking up or down, whatever it is. But I think also remember that you would have to be an absolute expert in it. Just to point out, my colleague at Detector, who runs the Detector, is a true global expert in this, who started this. You have to have the expertise, because if you make a comment, or if you make a decision of someone's guilt based upon body language, you need to be able to verify it in a court or a hearing. Be ready for this. So I'm just trying to be realistic here. I think it's a great question, honestly, but keep it in proportion, be sensible about it. If somebody is behaving in a certain way non-verbally, then it tells you something. Of course it does. And if you think they're lying, fine, you think they're lying, then say so or act upon it. But remember, in fraud, that people lying or showing deceit are not always committing fraud. You've got to get to the end of the line of, does this person have a case to answer in fraud? So you really need to be on the ball. Don't take body language reading too far, but have it in a sensible proportion.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Ian Ross. That is all the time we have for today. Follow us on our socials, where we have a Facebook page under BITPOD or a LinkedIn page, and join us next week for the next session. This was Marilyn Formosa for PKF, and this was BITPOD Sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.